Jake Mealy, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks for having me, John. Yeah, excited to be here.
It is a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Dublin. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. Today, we're going to be talking about employee surveys, employee feedback, and really what's broken with the model, with that kind of a system, and how we can break it down, rethink it, and do it in a much more effective way. I think everyone's experienced it. Everyone's experienced, the annual engagement survey or employee survey. I think people have experienced, perhaps pulse surveys or, various approaches to doing these sorts of things to varying degrees of effectiveness, often to low degrees of effectiveness. So we're going to unpack this. We're going to explore this together. As we get started, I wanted to share Jake's bio with everybody. Jake Mealy is a data analyst and storyteller whose experience spans biotech, sales, marketing, HR, tech, and people analytics. He holds a PhD from Trinity College Dublin and previously led data teams at Indeed and Analytic Partners. As Welliba's Chief Data Solutions Officer, he pioneers AI powered people analytics solutions. The insights delivered by his technology reveal the influence that employee experience has on hard business performance metrics like revenue and shareholder return, and really just such a tremendous background, insights into analytics and how that applies to employee experience and the workplace. A pleasure to have you, Jake. Anything you would like to add by way of your own background or personal context before we dive on in?
Yeah, I guess it's been a bit of a diverse sort of career journey for me so far, as your generous intro kind of highlighted there. But I suppose the arc of it has been bending more towards people analytics, particularly recently. And certainly when I think back to my previous role in Indeed, where we were really trying to, help clients understand, their hiring strategies and who their talent competitors were. Um, I think back to that now and some of the insights that we're uncovering now at Welliba in terms of the why behind talent movement or the why behind employee sentiment. Why do employees feel the way they do? How are they responding to that feeling? And what impact does that have on businesses? And I think back and I'm like, if only I knew then what I know
Mm,
now, the kind of analytics and the kind of tactical recommendations we could have given to clients and indeed would have been so much more powerful. And that's only sort of 3, 4 years ago. And so just the speed at which this field, like a lot of related analytics fields, is changing is just really kind of jaw dropping. It's blink and you miss it kind of. So yeah, I was just kind of reflecting on that before we jumped on the call, and yeah, I just think it's fascinating, and something that people probably really need to pay attention to stay up to date.
yeah, well, that's super interesting, especially given, I think, the state of like employer surveys that are out there, because I don't see them keeping any sort of pace with these shifts, right? Because like when you think about the annual employer survey, like the engagement survey or the satisfaction survey, has that changed for most companies much in the last decade? Do you think?
No, yeah, I mean, I think people, sort of gathering techniques and analytic techniques might have changed, but fundamentally, you're asking employees what they think, and that probably um, will for some time continue to be an important thing to do, right? Having a two-way dialogue between leadership and employees is important. But what I would say is that it leaves a lot of stones unturned. It gives you a very incomplete picture of the human capital in your business as a whole. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, you're engaging in a dialogue, right? You're asking questions, right? So that naturally creates an expectation, right? And so that's why when in Welliba we would term that type of employee analytics or people analytics as active listening. You're sending a signal to the employees that you want their feedback, and so that creates an expectation that actions will happen based on that feedback, which may or may
Yeah.
not be possible or useful for you as a business leader. And then secondarily, and in my opinion, sort of even more importantly, you're only ever looking at your own organization's results in the context of your own organization. Okay,
Yeah.
your survey provider might give you a benchmark or some sort of industry average number that that you can kind of like compare yourself against. But do you really know how you compare against your closest talent competitor? Do you even know who your closest talent competitor is? And if you do, what would be that? And this is why I was saying that about my previous work in Indeed. Um, let's say I'm a business leader in a care home, in rural England. Is my biggest talent competitor the care home in the next county over, or is it the
Right.
Amazon warehouse that's just opened up down the road? And
Right.
no matter which it is, and I think I'm losing talent to one of these places, how do I defend against that? Why is that happening? It's the why that's really really important. And that's fundamentally where the survey system is going to let you down, because you can survey your own employees all you want, but you'll never be able to survey the employees in that Amazon warehouse and find out what's going on over there, and compare apples to apples. And that's really where this kind of work that we're doing now totally changes that game. We're looking at totally different data sources, publicly accessible at vast scale. And so now all of a sudden it's possible to rack these organizations up side by side. And that's why I say that the survey picture is incomplete, because it's never going to give you that context of the wider ecosystem that you're operating in.
Yeah, and so to just recap a little bit what I'm hearing. So always important to understand how your employees are thinking, feeling, and to have kind of that dialogue piece where if they give you feedback, they feel like they're being heard, and that that's going to have some sort of impact, and that it might influence your decision making, and that you have some way to communicate back to them, like how it's influencing your decisions. Like that's kind of the bread and butter of like what these employee surveys have been, like engagement surveys or whatnot. And organizations to varying degrees have been successful at doing that. In my experience, often not very successful, and especially with that feedback piece and communicating back to like how it's been used. Like most organizations tend to be pretty terrible at that in my experience, but at least there's that possibility, and at
Right.
least there's been that intent, right? But so there's still that value though. There's still that value in doing that component. But what's missing is the contextualization, the ability to see how your talent picture fits within the broader talent picture of your surrounding area, your competitors, and not even just your direct competitors, not just like you were saying the other nursing homes, but anyone who might be competing for your talent, right? Um, so that's awesome. That sounds super intriguing. Yeah, tell us more. Like, how do you go about doing that with these public data sources?
Yeah, right. So this has really only become sort of possible. I mean, people have been online talking about their employment since the internet was created, right? So
Yeah.
this data isn't new, but its accessibility is what's changed. And really, we've needed AI to help us kind of get those go gadget arms and get out there into the internet, and gather all this together into one usable space. So it's really only been possible for the last 2, maybe 3 years tops. Um, and when we say publicly available data, what do we mean? We mean the obvious places, obvious, sort of Glassdoor reviews, Indeed reviews, these sort of dedicated platforms. Their local equivalents, for example, Open Work in Japan, these places where people purposefully go online to review their employment. But the real power of the AI and the LLM systems that we're able to build now is that they can read and understand a lot more free form type information. So think of your Reddit threads, think of your LinkedIn posts, think of professional networks, or even industry specific professional networks, where there's this like really nuanced, interesting discussion happening all the time, as employees compare notes, discuss what it's like to work where they work. And so that's they're the kind of sources that we're able to draw together now, and because it's publicly available, there's it's virtually instantaneous. You compare an analysis using this kind of data, our systems can run up a two company comparison in a couple of hours, probably. Whereas, a surveying cycle is going to take you 6 weeks, 2 months easily, to kind of get through. So the kind of insights are much more instantaneous. They're much more readily available. They put things in context, like we discussed, and it's all publicly available. So there's no data privacy, infosec kind of issues. All of this information is sitting out there. So it's really just about it's coming down to now which companies are best at sort of kind of realizing this and folding it into their people analytics strategy. The last thing, and from a data storytelling perspective, the kind of exciting thing I feel about this as well is we've spoken a little bit so far about, the tactical use case, from a talent defense, people investment type strategy, how an individual company might use this information. But what's really exciting as well is we can do it at a much larger scale, right? So you can start to ask really interesting questions, like if we measured, a particular cohort of companies, say, for example, the S&P 500, which we have done, what are the particular aspects of employee experience that connect with business performance, right? Because now we can line all these companies up and measure them in exactly the same way against the same model. And so we can ask these really interesting exam questions now. And this is what we're starting to see is these really firm connections between employee sentiment, employee experience, and the actual financial performance of these businesses.
Super fascinating. And you alluded to like the power of AI to help you to essentially capture all of this, right? With all this online data, um, which I mean, it certainly could have been possible, but it would have been way more time intensive, to have kind of tried to do this in previous years. So now it just makes it far more possible. I have to ask because certainly the practicality of this kind of data and like the usefulness as a product to organizations is huge. Do you leverage this like for like in a more of an academic sense as well? Are you using this for like academic papers also?
Yeah, so we are producing research and business white papers, right? So it's kind of like there's sort of two parallel research tracks, So in terms of proving its efficacy, we would have our team would have published research papers validating the results that we get from the public data against a cohort of survey delivered data. And so we see this really nice correlation there, which is important, right? Because it's a natural question people will ask is, oh, does the data not skew negative on the internet, for example? And by and large, actually, that's not what we see. We see these really, really strong correlations between what the signal that we're picking up from the public data and, say, for example, employee net promoter score
Yeah.
for a given cohort of companies, which would be based on survey results. So that's driving that sort of academic research, and of course we're always kind of working on validated scoring models and
Yeah.
psychometric models as well. That's formed a big part of the basic core research in Welliba. But then on the other side, we've got these really interesting business analytics white papers, which we're able to sort of use this technology now as the research tool. The technology is both a research goal in itself and also a tool to do further research. And this is where me and my team have been doing a lot of work. So, I mentioned the S&P 500. So we set out to measure those 500 companies at the end of 2025 in terms of their employee experience. Very, very simply, just stack rank them, the happiest companies at the top, the unhappiest companies at the bottom, cut off the top 20%, said these are our happy performers. These are the top EX companies. And then we looked at their total shareholder returns over the past 5 years. So that's a combination of share price growth and shareholder dividends. So a really strong financial metric. And we saw this really clear performance gap. Those companies with the high EX scores are outperforming the market by 5%. So
Mm.
there's this really, validated connection now between the sentiment and within these workforces and how the businesses ultimately perform. So that's been really exciting to kind of use this technology to help answer some of those kind of questions as well as researching the technology itself.
Super fascinating. So you have like just a ginormous numbers like 150,000 websites, 25 million data points. Um, you've already pointed to, a couple of like the headline types of findings. Are there any others that you would point to, from a high level of like some of the major things that you are pulling from some of these
Mm.
analyses?
Yeah, so I mean, we're still you mentioned a few of the numbers there. We're still kind of unpacking the data set. We've
Yeah.
published a white paper based on our findings so far, but there's so much detail and nuance and richness in there that we're still unpacking it. What I would say to your listeners is if you go to our website on welliba.ai, we've made the full data set publicly available and interactive. So people can get
Mm,
on there, they can throw up they can compare, say, Netflix versus Disney, for example, and they can kind of start to unpack what the different employee experience is like in those two companies, compare them side by side, and also look at things at a wider scale. So yeah, I mean, I already mentioned the big headline figure of, there's this strong connection between employee experience and business performance, and I think that's going to become more and more important as time goes on. But then kind of taking a step into the data and seeing, okay, well, what are the individual factors? Employee experience is a broad term. Lots of different aspects, go into contributing to how people feel about where they work. Their managers, their colleagues, their rewards, their compensation, their flexible working policy, like all of these different aspects. And it's been really striking to see this very, very strong theme carrying through the entire data set, which is this really positive sentiment around people's human to human interactions. So this is their
yeah.
interactions with their colleagues and with their direct managers. And actually, that finding goes beyond even the S&P 500. We've done similar analyses in the Nikkei 225 in Japan. We've looked at the Euronext, top 100 big cap companies in Europe, FTSE 100. This comes up again and again and again as a top positive factor, right? And that people the aspect of their employment that they enjoy the most is their interactions, their daily interactions with their human colleagues. So really, and I say human specifically there, right? Because we're having this debate now about how the workplace of the future, combination of humans, agents, what's all that going to look like? So really important finding there. And a sort of a word of warning as well, right? Because even we see this as being a positive factor, even in companies where the overall experience is negative. So
Hmm.
even where employees are broadly speaking unhappy, the one bright spark or the one bright spot in their experience tends to be their interactions with their colleagues. And so this is where it goes all the way back to what we were talking about at the start, right? Which is, what are the limitations of your survey? So if you're running your survey every year and you keep getting these results saying, oh well, we're getting great scores in terms of people's experience with their managers, their team dynamics, the individual team culture seems really strong, and like, by all means, take a moment to celebrate that. It's obviously better to get good scores than that than bad scores. But what this research is showing is that the chances are, your competitors are getting similar scores, that this is
Yeah.
what people enjoy about going to work. And so that's not a performance differentiator. That's table stakes. Like, everybody gets
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so really, like, if you want to make the difference, if you want to jump from one level to another, what the phrase we're using is, you need to start looking at fixing the floor rather than aiming at the ceiling. What are your low scores? What's going wrong? And like, those are the things, the companies that address those are the ones that we're seeing getting those performance gains in this data.
Yeah, super interesting because I see companies pointing to that all the time. And that's my first kind of reaction is like, okay, great. So what? I was actually at a dinner last week with someone and they were pointing to like their employee engagement score. And it was crazy. Like, it was crazy high. It was like 98% or something. I'm like, how is your employee engagement score like 98%? And they kind of laughed it off and they're like, well, it's easy. If they don't like it here, we just get rid of them.
Self-selection
I'm
bias. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
like, well,
yeah, yeah.
that's one way to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, a company with one employee presumably has a 100% engagement score, right? So, that's the natural endpoint. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the employee experience dynamic, being able to look at it and how it changes over time in comparison to all these other organizations using this public data. I think it's super fascinating, and the fact that you have, the data set publicly available that other people can dig into it, I think is also equally awesome. For anyone to dig in. That's something I think I personally am going to go check it out and go go dig into it because I just think that sounds really cool. Um, what do you think? Like anyone who's listening, who's a people manager, an HR person, or a senior executive, anyone who's listening to this and they're like, oh, maybe the way we've been doing it all along isn't sufficient anymore. Like what can they do? What's actionable? For them to take away from this conversation today? What are the next steps?
Yes. I think it depends a little bit on which persona specifically of the little list you had there you're talking about. For C-suite, for sort of executive level CEOs, CFOs, I'm watching with real interest to see when this type of data becomes a standard part of earnings calls. Because I think analysts are going to start asking about it, especially as this connection, like it's not just our research. World Economic Forum published similar research the end of last year as well. So I think this is just becoming, and it's also intuitive, right? Like anyone who's worked in a high performing organization with, just kind of feels that this is true, right? That motivated, happy employees are probably going to produce better business outcomes. So if I was an analyst, maybe picking my portfolio for the coming quarters, like this would be definitely going into my
Yeah.
thinking, right? It's like, okay, tell me what your current employee experience score is, or your employee sentiment is. How does that compare to your closest competitors? And how do you think it's going to impact your growth or our returns over the coming quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters? And the first time a CEO gets that question in earnest and doesn't have an answer ready, I think is going to be like quite interesting. And so, that hopefully that'll result in CEOs going to their, or CFOs going to their people analytics function or their HR function and banging the door down and saying, hang on, we have to understand this properly and then connect it to what we're doing. So, yeah, so I think from a CEO, CFO perspective, it's really about starting to think about that connection. Using it as a forward-facing metric. It should be a fundamental business performance metric the same way as cost of goods or
Yeah.
cost of capital is, and I would expect it to become that. I think if you're a HR leader, you probably you're already aware of all of this, right? So you already would have been feeling it. So there, it's more about asking, like coming up with a good exam question. What is it that you think is true about your organization? What do you think would make the biggest, point of improvement? What do you need budget for? Like I said, fixing the floor, and then maybe having a look at this type of data as a way of unlocking that budget from your colleagues in the C-suite, by being able to point to these things and saying, this makes a difference. This makes a tangible difference to the performance of our business. These are the three things. These are the three things that we need to fix, not only to improve the motivation and productivity of our own workforce, but to defend against talent drain to our nearest competitors, and potentially to target the kind of talent that we need to future-proof the company. And so you can just be having way more impactful and punchier conversations when you've got these kind of numbers and this kind of evidence, on your side. So I think that's really the place to start, is the exam question. But yeah, this type of methodology is going to become standard practice pretty quickly, I think. So people should be paying attention. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jake, this has just been a super interesting and eye-opening conversation with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to unpack this with us and to share your insights with us today. As we wrap things up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word for today.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today. So yeah, I'd encourage people to, obviously, if they want to connect on LinkedIn, always there to connect and to discuss. I think the first port of call for people, particularly to understand more about this research and explore the data themselves, would be our website, welliba.ai. So that's WELLIBA.ai. And that would be a good place to start. And I think, yeah, a final word is maybe not to like I take an optimistic view of this. I think this is empowering. This kind of analysis and insight, because it's easy to get, it's empowering. So definitely the take home message is not to be afraid of this. Embrace it. It's really unlocking a whole new level of analytics and understanding, which is good for everybody. It's good for businesses and
Yeah.
it's good for employees.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's awesome. Thank you, Jake. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Jake and his team can do for you. Check out the website, check out the data, all just awesome stuff. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. They can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.